I always enjoy seeing a Metroidvania branch out beyond the two archetypes of either outer space or Gothic Victorian. It's fun to see how a developer handles the traditional gameplay concepts and design ideas and applies them to a different setting, which also helps to keep the genre fresh by adding more variety. It takes a clever team of developers to play with the genre's ideas, yet still keep things familiar so veterans can adapt and enjoy the game as well. With that in mind, this week we're looking at Ori and the Blind Forest, out now on Xbox One and the Steam Marketplace. Ori and the Blind Forest puts players in the role of Ori, a spirit animal that has been separated from his family and raised by a doting creature known as Naru. As the two of them live their lives out, the forest around them begins to die off to the point of being unsustainable to them, and it's up to Ori to figure out what caused all this to happen. From this point, the game unveils a story around the player, using gameplay as a means to stage Ori's trials against the cruelty of nature and the wrath of a malevolent beast, all for the sake of restoring the forest. The gameplay for Ori is really tight and engrossing, with a heavy emphasis on skill-based platforming and a light dash of puzzle solving and combat. Ori starts off with your standard skill set of running, jumping, and homing shot from his fairy assistant Sane. Over the course of the game, Ori gains the standard upgrades such as double jumps and air glides, along with more feral abilities such as wall climbing and a parry that shoots Ori in a direction defined by the player. As per the game genre, many of the game's abilities are unlocked as you progress, most of them through the story, but a select few are unlocked behind an upgrade tree in the menu. The game emphasizes mobility to an impressive degree. While Ori and the Blind Forest is more linear than most Metroidvanias, the game is designed with this in mind. Levels are all tightly designed to where each mobility power-up you gain is integrated into the platforming experience as the game progresses. The game expects you to learn its tricks in order to progress, and it never seems to run out of fun platforming challenges that tests a player's abilities. Combat is very simple, but it flows well with the emphasis of mobility. Since Sane is a separate entity to Ori, this allows players to move unabated across enemies while at the same time be able to deal damage. The parry skill, known as Bash, is by far my favorite combat ability. While it deals next to no damage, it promotes clever reflex-based actions in combat and also facilitates a quick escape for more speed-oriented players. Ori's emphasis on speed and mobility is also great for backtracking. As players become more accustomed to their abilities, backtracking becomes swift and effortless as moves get chained together in an elegant fashion. Mobility is probably one of the key things to get down correctly for a Metroidvania, and Ori quite possibly has the most well-made mobility moveset I've seen in a game, let alone a Metroidvania. I do have some small complaints with the game's design direction, mainly from a design philosophy standpoint more than anything. While movement in Ori is a delight to partake in, combat is overly simple and in some cases it feels like an afterthought. While Ori himself evolves tremendously in terms of mobility, his combat potential peaks once he gets the bomb and bash ability. From there, combat in this game never really changes. You either fly into a mob and explode, or you bash bullets or enemies aside and not really care about fighting. This feels like a bit of a squandered opportunity to me in two weird ways. Had there been more of a focus on combat, the game would benefit by having more enemy types in it. And inversely, if they removed the ability to fight back, Ori could have taken an interesting turn in game design by putting an emphasis on escaping predators rather than combat. The lack of a focus on combat in this game also means there are no boss fights. Now granted, the game does have climactic peaks with a heart-racing escape sequence that tests a player's reflexes, but something about the lack of a traditional boss fight never really sat right with me. Another complaint, albeit a small one, is that the unlockable triple jump really breaks the platforming of the game. This perk trivializes many of the clever platforming challenges in Ori if a player is stubborn enough, so if you want to enjoy the game in its purest form, I would highly recommend against getting that skill. Finally, some of the secrets in this game are mean in that they can be locked away after you clear certain levels. Unless the player is meticulous in their exploration, I really can't see the average player getting 100% completion on their first run, which feels unfair. While many of these complaints are basically nitpicking from my own personal philosophy of game design, they do stand out as something that others may also find unappealing as well. The design direction for this game is, for lack of a better word, gorgeous, which is good considering how it's one of the selling points of the game. From a visual direction, Ori and the Blind Forest evokes a style very similar to a Studio Ghibli film. With their lush and colorful environments alongside a cast of simple but memorable characters, the game really feels like a high-production animated film in so many ways. There's a nice variety in the environments as well, mixing the traditional natural elements of the open wild with a slight spiritual tinge to create a breathtaking realm to explore. I do have one slight complaint, however, with how the game is animated. While the game runs at 60 frames per second, all the animations are done at 30 frames per second, which gives a weird sense of dissonance when you're playing through the fast-paced nature of the levels. The sound direction in this game is great. The music is richly orchestrated with a heavy emphasis on drums and flutes, which adds to the atmosphere of the game. Sound effects are also really well done. Every sound effect has a weight and impact to it that helps define everything. One warning, however, the game is initially very loud when you start it up, so you may want to turn down your speakers and take off your headset when you first load the game. Now, this may not happen to others depending on your hardware, but for me it was alarming enough to warrant this warning. The writing in Ori is very sparse and almost non-existent, but it still manages to provoke intrigue. Ori's story is very basic in nature and is narrated by the Spirit Tree and Sane since Ori can't talk. While the main plot is very brief, the game does a great job of creating backstory about the realm. Whether actively described by Sane when you get power-ups or passively through the environment, the game slowly builds on its history with what happens through the forest, then it uses the lightly sprinkled plot to bring context to all this backstory. In many ways, this game feels like an animated film with how vibrant and breathtaking everything about it is. Ori and the Blind Forest is programmed on the Unity engine, and while the game doesn't use much processing or memory power, the game does take a whopping 8 GB of hard drive space due to the high fidelity assets of the game. The game supports keyboard, mouse, and X input from Microsoft controllers. However, keyboard mouse is somewhat clumsy to use compared to a controller, and PlayStation controller support is somewhat shoddy from what I've read up on. The options menu is fairly bare bones, only offering resolution changes, brightness and contrast, VSync, and volume controls. The game itself ran well enough, though there were times where the game felt slightly jittery to me. I'm not sure if this is due to the clashing frame rates or issues with the game engine, but it never really impeded my enjoyment of the game either way. Despite the lack of combat, Ori and the Blind Forest is another strong candidate for my game of the year. With fast-paced platforming, jaw-dropping visuals, and a world I could get lost in, Ori did a great job at fusing cinematography with classic gameplay tenets. The price tag is a tad steep at $20 versus the 8 hours I got out of the game, but I could fully recommend this game even outside of a sale. This game is a must-play if you remotely enjoy video games, and especially if you like Metroidvanias. Ori and the Blind Forest is a game that stands out among its contemporaries, and I'm so glad that I got a chance to play it.